Hello. We've got 2 more minutes. Welcome, everyone. Just go ahead and grab your last cup of coffee and have a seat. We'll be going in just a second. Apparently, Twitter doesn't start right until 10, so we can't start before then. We have 2 minutes. X, I should say. You guys are quiet today. This is very unusual. Usually have to rein you in. Yeah. All right, we're live. Let's get this party started. Welcome to the PGP Pretty Good Policy for Crypto meeting. I'm Paul Brigner, the organizer of PGP, Vice President of Strategic Alliances for Electric Coin Company, the creators and developers of Zcash. Thank you all for joining today, both online and in person, and for being a part of the crypto policy community. We're here to share information, build a stronger crypto policy community, and drive forward with pretty good policy for crypto. I want to thank our sponsors, including Coinbase, Blockchain Association, Electric Coin Company, and the VanEck Digital Assets Initiative at the University of Southern California, especially for making this beautiful venue available to us. In addition to an amazing lineup of lightning talks, we have 2 special Project Glitch segments today. The Glitch panel in the second half of this meeting will revisit the legal and policy issues surrounding Tornado Cash and Samurai Wallet, featuring Peter Van Valkenburg of Coin Center and Amanda Tuminelli of DeFi Education Fund. We had them talk back in January, so this will be a refresh on that issue. And before that, a Project Glitch contributor, Veronica Irwin, will join us to give an in-depth overview of crypto developments in Congress from a very glitchy journalist point of view. To ensure you are notified of future meetings, please subscribe to our Luma calendar page. It's lu.ma/PGP for crypto. You can see the full calendar of events there for the rest of the year. Before we kick off our lightning talks, I have a couple of brief announcements. At the last meeting, Mike Orcutt of Project Glitch told you all about the second annual DC Privacy Summit that is scheduled to happen here on October 16th. Tickets are available for purchase, and if you register today using code PGP, you get a substantial PGP community discount. So the Luma page for that is lu.ma/DC Privacy Summit 2025. The discount ends at midnight, so register now. Also, I wanted to mention, if you've seen some of my social posts recently, I did a soft launch of something I'm calling the Institute for Economic Freedom. It is, as I view it, an umbrella for the DC Privacy Summit, for the PGP series, and also for a new thing that I'm starting to recruit students for. It's a Zcash Academy. For anyone who wants to become a hardcore Zcasher, this is for you. So yeah, I know you're going to break the doors down for that opportunity. It is going to be cool, so let me know if you're interested. Okay, let's proceed to our scheduled program. Our first Lightning Talk speaker today is going to be Jessica Martinez from the Blockchain Association, but she's going to be introduced by Dan Spooler. So Dan, would you come up and say a couple remarks and get Jessica up here?
Thanks so much, Paul. Great to be back with everybody. I'm Dan Spooler with the Blockchain Association. We're super thrilled to be continuing this partnership. I can't believe it's already halfway through the year, and it's been a really busy first half of the year for the Blockchain Association and the industry as a whole. We have our new CEO, who hopefully will be joining us next month, Summer Mersinger, formerly the CFTC, as our new CEO. Here today, we have several of our new staff members from the BA. Make sure you say hi to them. We have Sophia, we have Ellie, we have Paulina, and of course, we also have Madison Parker here and Michael from our team. And I'm about to introduce Jessica, who handles our government affairs division. But yeah, again, thank you for the partnership. We're looking forward to a good year ahead. And if there's anything we can do, don't hesitate to ask. And thank you to all of our members, our friends, allies. Great to be here. So let me introduce Jessica, who's going to give us an update on the state of government affairs and the very, very busy few weeks we've been going through.
Great. Thank you so much. Hey everyone, it's me again, Jessica. Thanks so much, Dan. So I just wanted to give a quick rundown of what to expect this week, and happy to go back a little bit further, just to kind of get us a good visual of where we are. So the Senate is on its way to pass the first forward-looking crypto legislation with the Genius Act, as we will have final passage today. It's expected today at about 4:30. Yes, very exciting. This was a huge win. We're not to the president's desk yet, but I do think that this is something that we can all acknowledge as something as a really big accomplishment from everybody here in pushing for it, and then also seeing the bipartisanship in the Senate has been extraordinary. So once that happens, the House side will have a couple of different options. They can do a lot of things, but they have their Stable Bill Act that they passed out of the House Financial Services Committee that was passed out of committee earlier this year. They can put that to the floor. They can pick up Genius once it passes and put that to the floor with no changes. They can also try to combine the two in either adding new language in Genius or just passing the stablecoin, and what will end up happening is they would conference that at the end. There's also, a conference is a very loose term. They typically will, there isn't a formal conference that you can have, but most often what we see in Congress is, the back channels and negotiations between the drafters in both the Senate and the House, coordinating to get a language that everybody can be okay with and pass out of the House and then get its way over to the president's desk. So that's kind of where we're at there. We will keep an eye on where things are going, but again, all very good signs that bill is on its way forward. So on the House side, even though the House is out of session this week, there are still negotiations happening with key staff and the Clarity Act. They're still underway. They're working with their own individual party members. They're working across the aisle. They're working with industry to ensure the bill does find a path forward. We will be looking at the Rules Committee the latter half of this week, just monitoring it to see if there are going to be any bill text that comes out. There is going to be the bill will need to come through the House Rules floor before it can get to the floor. That I do want to recognize that there are some things going on outside of crypto that can absolutely impact timing here. There's a lot of stuff we've seen in the news happening over the weekend. It's happening overseas. And if there is some sort of like foreign aid package or any other package that comes through and that will take precedent, it could push back all these timelines. So, there is the goal. I know the goal from House leadership to get things done and a bill moved to the floor before July 4th, but we may see that slip into the latter half of July. So that is kind of it for me. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Jessica. Really amazing to see these developments happening on the Hill. I'd like to now welcome Marcelo Prates. He's the Policy Director for the Stellar Development Foundation, and as I've mentioned, I think many times, Stellar is one of my favorite crypto projects. So, Marcelo, please give us an update on what you've been up to.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here again. And today I wanted to highlight a series of policy briefs that we, the policy team at the Stellar Development Foundation, we have just launched. As the buzz around crypto and blockchain continues to strong, especially here in DC, we created the series to discuss critical issues in this space the Stellar way. Straight talk, no fluff. And the series is not just for policy wonks. Anyone interested in separating hype from substance, as Paul would say, can find something there. So the first 3 briefs now available at our policy hub, and yes, we do have a policy hub at the Stellar Foundation. These 3 briefs, they focus on the 3 strategic areas for the foundation this year. So we're talking about payments, tokenization, and decentralized finance. You can find the briefs using the QR code on the screen. So the brief on payments makes the case for bringing public spending to public blockchains. A lot has been said lately about improving government efficiency. And if there's one area where public blockchains can help on that front, that area is payments. Public blockchains can make government payments not only cheaper and faster, but also more transparent, much more transparent. And I mean, if we are talking about spending taxpayer money, increased visibility and accountability should be not just desirable, but required. The second brief looks at the next step on the tokenization journey and the hurdles along the way. So after the tokenization of cash, especially US dollar stablecoins that became the digital dollar, the tokenization of yield-bearing instruments was the natural step in this journey. So just to give you an idea of how big is this market, tokenized securities in the form of money market fund shares, they grew from around $750 million in early 2024 to almost $7 billion now. So it's almost a 10-time increase in a year and a half. Even so, it's a small amount, because if you look at the whole size of the money market funds, just here in the US, we're talking about a $7 trillion market. Just in the US, 80% of that, money market funds backed by government securities. So tokenization of securities can have immediate benefits, not just for issuers, but also for users. For issuers, the reduction in bookkeeping and reconciliation costs is real. Franklin Templeton launched back in 2021 an on-chain money market fund on Stellar, and they say they were able to move from a cost of $50,000 for each 50,000 transactions, so $1 per transaction, for their on-chain fund to process and reconcile the same 50,000 transactions, they pay just $120. And that enabled Franklin Templeton to provide users, investors, with another option, because for this on-chain fund, the initial investment required is just $20. For any other money market fund, traditional money market fund, we're talking about 500, if not a couple of thousands of dollars. For this on-chain money market fund on Stellar, that's $20 for initial investment. I mean, this also improves financial access. And finally, the last brief about decentralized finance, DeFi. The idea is to provide an overview of DeFi, making the case that DeFi apps look a lot like vending machines running on your computer. So think about the DeFi journey. You open the app, check the options available and the prices displayed there, choose the option you want, use digital tokens, use digital assets as the payment token, and immediately receive not soda or candy, but a financial product. Anyone with the right tokens, and in this case, digital assets, can have access to the DeFi vending machine. It's all open, automated, running on blockchains, and powered by smart contracts. From there, we discuss why DeFi matters, the technical and regulatory challenges, and how the smart contract platform on the Stellar network can help boost the offering of DeFi applications. So take a look, spread the word, and reach out. My email address is also on the screen. Happy to receive your comments and suggestions. Thanks again, Paul.
Thanks, Marcelo. I've read all of those policy briefs. I can highly recommend them and say that they absolutely do separate the hype from the substance. So check them out, and thanks for all your work. Now we have a very special guest. I believe it's the first time she's been at a PGP to present. Is this the first? Yeah, she's been before, but so it is a treat, I have to say. This is Julie Stitzel. She's Senior Vice President at the Digital Currency Group, and if you're not familiar with them, you should be. They've been a very, very important organization in crypto for as long as I can remember, and Julie's going to tell us about some cool things that they're up to.
Morning, everybody. Let me see if I can work this. Oh, yeah, okay. So, yeah, thanks for the invitation, Paul. I'm Julie. I'm with DCG. For those who aren't familiar with us, we are an investor in the crypto and AI space. We own 5 companies, Grayscale, which is the world's largest crypto native digital asset firm, Foundry, the world's largest Bitcoin mining pool, Luno, which is equivalent to Coinbase in emerging markets, and 2 new subsidiaries that we launched at the end of last year, one focused on Bitcoin mining and the other on decentralized AI, which I want to talk to you a little bit about today. So we just last month had a fly-in where we had close to 40 of our founders, because we also invest in about 200 companies across the globe. We had about 40 founders come to DC, and in addition to meeting with members about a lot of the stuff that Jessica covered in her presentation, we focused heavily on decentralized AI. A lot of folks think of DCG and they think of crypto and blockchain, and more recently we've spent equal, if not more, time focusing on decentralized AI. And as all of you in this room know, when you're talking about something new, it's really important to define what you're talking about and where you started. We're at the stage where people might be talking about decentralized AI in different ways, so I just wanted to level set with a quick definition here and what we're talking about. So when we say decentralized AI, we're talking about distributed ownership and governance of AI in order to help mitigate its risks and to make the technology more transparent and accessible to all. And prior to our fly-in, we went into the field to do some polling so that when we were meeting with folks, it was anchored in some new data. So I want to quickly review that with you guys so you have a sense of where consumers and voters are when it comes to decentralized AI. And just as a preview, when we did this survey, we didn't talk about decentralized AI because we made the assumption no one knows what we're talking about when we say that. We didn't talk about centralized AI, and I'll get into that in a minute, but I want to cover the key findings. Well, first, let me talk about the goals. Again, this was ahead of our fly-in, and we really wanted to anchor our education and better understand where consumers and voters are on this issue so that we're starting there and we're bringing them to this. It was a national survey of more than 200 respondents. 1,800 of them were voters, and we were in the field at the end of April. So our key findings. Consumers are optimistic about AI's potential, but they demand stronger personal oversight. Privacy was a huge theme with our responses in the polling, and the majority of respondents said that if folks are using our data, we want more control over it. The public has a strong appetite that's growing for AI beyond big tech's constraints. So we tested, big tech and the players in this space versus the positioning of more decentralized actors or lesser known actors, and there was a really strong preference for decentralization in that respect. Voters are looking for alternatives to centralized AI, whether that's because they recognize sort of key deficits from the internet, key deficits from crypto. There is a fundamental understanding that decentralization offers a more resilient and a more private and a more secure network than having or relying on these centralized actors. And then finally, decentralized AI and decentralized systems are more favorable to consumers, and I want to dig into that a little bit more. So this is going back to what I originally said. We never said decentralized AI. We never said centralized AI. We used System 1 and System 2. So System 1 was described as owned and controlled by a single entity or corporation, often through large servers, where users have limited say over what data is collected and how it's used. System 2, decentralized AI, was described as systems that are distributed across multiple networks or connections, allowing them to operate independently and collaboratively, where users can control what data is shared and how it's used. So when you take a look at how this fared across various circumstances, decentralized AI wins the day almost every day. It's beneficial to overall society by 77%. And I'd say from one of the things, and this was our pollster was Harris, and one of the things that Harris said is they were surprised by the large margins of this response. It's more trustworthy. It's more supportive of innovation. It's safe. It's able to solve issues more effectively. It's secure for consumers' data. But then when you flip and energy efficient. But then when you flip concerns that consumers might have with respect to censorship, likely to benefit big tech, you see that centralized actors are seen as more harmful to consumers in that respect. So if you want to, I'm happy to share this deck so you can link to the full data or the full polling responses. But I'd also make an ask of this group. Senator Rounds and Senator Heinrich have an open RFI right now around AI. Responses are due by June 30th. So if this is an issue that you care about, I highly recommend responding. And if you have any questions, I'm one of 3 on the DCG policy team. Tiffany Angelo is based in DC, and then Kyle Schnepp, some of you may know, is also on our policy team. So we're here with any questions, but thank you, Paul, for the opportunity.
And I have to say, she just scratched the surface of all that they're doing on decentralized AI. There's a whole ecosystem they're building around this from the technology perspective that I think is super cool. Maybe we'll have to have another talk about that in the future. Yeah, all right. We'll give you more time next time. All right, now we're going to go to a remote speaker, Amy James of the Web3 Working Group. She's got a really cool update on what happened in Montana recently. So let's get her on the screen. There she is. Go ahead, Amy.
Hey, Paul. Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here with you. This is such an exciting time to be in crypto. I've been in the industry since 2014, so it's just really wonderful to see all of the activity that's happening lately. So a little background on Web3 Working Group. What we are is a 501c3 that advocates for Web3 infrastructure, what has become known now as decentralized physical infrastructure, or DPIN. We provide education and advocacy about what Web3 is and why it's important. So we do everything from creating content like our Web3 Basics series, which covers everything from what is cryptography to what is blockchain, and lots of things in between, to our podcast with Web3 founders called What Kind of Internet Do You Want? We also provide education and advocacy to legislators and regulators about how what we used to call utility tokens and now call network tokens are used to orchestrate networks and are distinct from and not financial instruments. So last year, we conducted a survey of the DPIN sector to ask what they would need in a network token law, and we helped to draft the definition for these tokens to create an exemption. And as Paul said, we're very happy to report that that law has been passed now in Montana and signed by the governor. It's called the Financial Freedom and Innovation Act. It's SB 265. The law says that a network token is defined as a digital asset that is used to facilitate, coordinate, or enable access to decentralized computing resources, consumer internet services, or internet infrastructure services via blockchain. This includes services such as data storage, both permanent and temporary, computation, wireless access, data capture, audio or visual media hosting and streaming, and network bandwidth. The exemption can also be used. This is an interesting and important feature, I think, especially because we've been kind of under the foundation model for so long, where so many entities were offshoring as a kind of a way to have some protection. It has a way, of course, for new companies to register for the exemption, but also for existing foreign entities to re-domicile here in the US. And it also has a cap of $250 million for a token raise, but that's per year. So we hope that that will be high enough for companies to feel like it's appealing. Last week, there was a rulemaking hearing. It went well. And the next step is just for companies to come and work with the commission one-on-one to get registered and to apply. And so if you know of a project that would be interested in that, please reach out to us. We're happy to make some introductions. We also created a little custom GPT that you can chat with if you want to ask questions about this, this law or get any more details. So yeah, that's what we're up to. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy. That's outstanding. Appreciate your work. It's a really cool update. And since we're on the topic of DPIN, I'm going to change my order just a little bit and bring up Mohan Panada of D-Charge. He's the founder and CEO of D-Charge, a DPIN project. And then right after that, we're going to have Matthew from Bitcoin Policy Institute. Come on up.
Hi, morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak at this forum. My name is Mohan Panada. I'm the founder and CEO of D-Charge. And what we do is that we build decentralized charging infrastructure. That's where we come in. And I'm glad to see you all again. I think we've met at different forums, and I'm glad I'm having a forum to talk here. So the difference between we have very strong conviction that DPIN is going to be the next frontier, especially when connecting with the cryptocurrencies with the users on the ground. I think that's where it basically touches ground. If you look at it, cryptocurrencies are mostly an abstract form for a lot of people, right? They look at tokens, they look at currencies, they look at DeFi. But DPIN is something that is actually physical. It's not abstract, and people can actually see it. And what we do, and maybe I take a step back and give you an example, right? If you look at traditional the combustion vehicles that we used to drive, the gas stations took about 40 years to get to where they are today with the distribution that they have to facilitate filling up gas for all the cars. But if you look at the electric revolution, we do not have that kind of time bandwidth. We don't have 20 years to stretch to build that infrastructure, right? And that is where we think we're convinced that DPIN is going to be the next generation of infrastructure building, because it allows decentralized ownership and community ownership of infrastructure. And to that effect, it has been very successful effect for us also. We've been able to deploy across multiple countries in Southeast Asia, Central Asia, India, United States, and even Europe because of this principle. Because you're looking at this ecosystem where it's not just centralized and not having some big tech somewhere having all the ownership, but through DPIN, what we do is we allow the revenues and the money to flow into the wallets of the people who are part of building the ecosystem itself. And on this topic, we had some very interesting conversations listening with SEC, and they are very positive about the aspect of deepen when it comes to implementations, because they also believe, if structured properly with the right legal teams and in the right language, they may not be considered as a security, and they will be considered as a utility, because they're actually helping the common, the growth of the economy itself. The example that I want to quote here is, let's say that we have the communities here, let's take a community in Maryland that wants to deploy decentralized charging infrastructure, and because that's a real revenue, because the cost per kilowatt hour is about, let's say, 15 cents maximum, but the charge per kilowatt hour is about 45, 50 cents. When you charge your Tesla, you know how much you're paying, right? That's actual revenue that people are willing to pay for the premium as a service, right? And on top of that, this money is going back into the community, the revenue. So actually a real revenue layer. But what happens if the community does not have the financial bandwidth to invest in the infra? So that's where this decentralized private infrastructure networks come in, because then we can have a set of participants, let's say from another part of the world or another part of the same country, to say, okay, I'm going to invest $100,000 into a pool to support this infra, and then I will take a part of the yield. Right, so now it's not so difficult, because you have communities helping each other, countries growing vertically and horizontally, because you're building microeconomies around microgrids. So for us, we are very, very bullish on Deepin. We believe that it is going to be the next generation of infrastructure building. It's already started, whether it's about getting on the bandwagon. And yeah, I think it's about structuring it perfectly without having. The advice that we received from SEC, I think it will help this podium, is as long as we're able to have a very good write-up of terminology that's within the framework of SEC, then it can be put on the no action task force, which means that it will not be considered a security. So that might be a very good starting point for other deepen businesses. Very quick, one minute pitch about D-Charge is we build decentralized charging infrastructure. We have deployed close to 700 plus chargers right now, and we are located in multiple jurisdictions. We work in an Airbnb model where anyone who has space, it could be a garage, it could be a parking space, it could be whatever, a mom and pop store, they can host a charger and get and participate in the network economy. So I'm happy to take questions if it's open. Otherwise, thank you for the opportunity, and it was great speaking with you all. Thank you very much.
Love it. That is very exciting. Okay, Matthew, a brief announcement, and then we're going to go to Veronica to give us another glitch deep dive.
Good morning. Thank you, Paul, for having me again. I'm Matthew Pines, the Executive Director of the Bitcoin Policy Institute. The rest of my team is heads down planning for our third annual Bitcoin Policy Summit, which will be next Wednesday at the Ronald Reagan International Building. So hopefully, as many of the folks in this room, I'll see you there. This is the third year we've done it. The first year was a few months after the FTX collapse. Essentially, it was, we're still alive, we're still here, we're not going away. This is a strategic and important thing. You should start getting smart on it. It's about 150 people sort of showed up in suits for the first time. A lot of Bitcoiners wearing a suit in DC. That was successful. The second year, we sort of doubled the attendance and brought a lot more kind of policymaker attention to the overall technology and the evolving industry, and kind of up-leveled kind of the significance in a lot of senior officials' minds. This is sort of the third year now. I think we're going to double again until attendance. We've sort of outgrown the space we had last year. We're expecting maybe 700, 800 people there in person, and tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of live streams. So I think we're tracking for it to be our biggest event thus far. And we're sort of designing it to have maybe non-traditional type of kind of conference. So almost like maybe 2 or 3 panel discussions. Almost everything else is like lightning talks or firesides that are meant to be very focused and very specific. And we've sort of sequenced them. So as an example, I'll be doing a fireside chat with the Deputy Director of the CIA, and then immediately after that, we're going to have Matt Corallo talk about the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act. And then in the afternoon, we're going to have Patrick Witt, who's the Director of the Office of Strategic Capital at the Department of Defense. And after that, we're going to have the Resistance Money Trio give a talk about coin joins. So kind of, very kind of, span the gamut of perspectives on this topic. And And yeah, we'd love to have anyone in this audience that wants to attend for free. You can use code BFA. Go to btcpolicysummit.org. I'll say that again, btcpolicysummit.org. And yeah, we're probably going to about reach capacity of the space. So if you really want to attend, looking forward to seeing everyone there. And thanks again for having me, Paul, and hopefully we'll see you all next week. Thanks.
I tell you, I consider it a must-attend event, and that's a really big deal for him to offer free attendance for everybody here. So thank you for that. That's really nice of you. That code was BFA. You better get that while you can. All right, let's go to Veronica Irwin online. And so Veronica, this is our first time to attend, and I guess Mike's going to give us a little intro here.
Good morning. Happy PGP. Mike Orcutt. I'm the founding editor of Project Glitch. I'll be doing moderating the panel after this. This morning we're going to try something a little new, and check in with Veronica Irwin. She's an independent reporter who is constantly talking with her sources on the Hill, always trying to find the signal in the noise. Even though she's based in New York, she's virtually here in DC, given how connected she is. So Veronica, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
The big topic, of course, is the Genius Act, a topic that Veronica recently wrote about for Project Glitch. You can check that out at projectglitch.xyz. So Veronica, quickly bring us up to speed with the status of the Genius bill. We had a little bit of an update earlier, but from your perspective as a reporter, talking to lots of people, what are the things that we need to know right now? When is the vote? How are the prospects for passing? And anything else that we should keep in mind?
Yeah, it's been a chaotic couple of weeks. Anybody who's been watching the coverage here, I believe it was said earlier, but the floor vote in the Senate for the Genius Act is going to be around 4:30 p.m. today. They tend to run a little bit late, but around 4:30 is when you should tune in. And everybody seems to expect that it will pass. You might have heard the word cloture a lot in the last couple of weeks. That's a procedural vote that happens before something goes to a floor vote, but it requires more buy-in. It requires 60 votes to pass cloture. Meanwhile, the bill you only need a sheer majority. So because we've passed cloture, and because a lot of Democrats were kind of putting the pressure on for the cloture vote, if we've gotten past that, everybody's expecting the bill itself to pass later today.
Let's get a little bit past the process and look a little bit more closely at the implications. So the bill has a counterpart in the House, as we talked about earlier today. But let's assume that Genius passes, the two houses agree on what to send to the president's desk, and then he signs it. So what are the important things that this bill requires stablecoin issuers to do?
Yeah, at a high level, it is defining what a stablecoin is. That was something that pretty much everybody agreed needed to happen, and specifically to make sure that algorithmic stablecoins are not considered a permitted stablecoin under this law. It sets what the reserve requirements are. So for a stablecoin to be a permitted stablecoin, it has to be one-to-one backed by dollar or dollar equivalent assets. A lot of the stablecoins that expect to be regulated use treasuries, for example, to back the tokens. And then there's this state and federal divide that is setting up like a registration framework. So stablecoins above a $10 billion market cap, which is most of the ones that you're familiar with, would have to register at the federal level, and they would be registering with the OCC. And that is a bank regulator, so it's like a bank-like registration framework. And then for the smaller stablecoins, they can register at the state level, those that are under 10 billion, which honestly are very hard to find. They're probably not the ones that you're familiar with, but those basically have the option to be regulated at a state level if they don't, ever intend to become bigger than $10 billion.
Okay, so let's make it a little bit more concrete and use the example of Tether, which I think everyone is familiar with because of how dominant it is in the stablecoin market. So what does this bill mean for Tether?
That is the question, I think, for a lot of reporters, and why you might not see too much coverage directly on what this means for Tether is because it's been fluctuating a lot at every stage. In broad strokes, this bill wants to the goal of this bill is to incentivize stablecoin issuers to come onshore and build this industry in the United States. But Tether is the biggest stablecoin by a huge margin, and they are issuing overseas. Their headquarters is currently in El Salvador, but I believe the company is based in the British Virgin Islands, and it's all a little bit weird. They haven't been as transparent as I think a lot of regulators want them to be. At the same time, there is a concern that if you cut Tether entirely out of the market, that would have huge market effects for American crypto companies. So, where things stand right now, and this is a huge caveat because the most up-to-date text that's on congress.gov is from May 5th. The most up-to-date text that I have is from May 14th. It's June 17th. So things might have changed. But it basically, as it stands right now, Tether is not explicitly banned, but they would have to definitely make some business changes to comply with this bill. So the bill allows overseas issued stablecoins to operate with U.S. companies so long as they are able to comply with U.S. law enforcement. And also the Treasury Department has to basically approve the regime of the government that they are in. So Treasury would basically have to say, hey, Tether, you are issuing in a country that we think has a similar enough framework to what's in the United States. And Treasury has to be transparent about, what they base that evaluation off of. And it's unclear whether Tether is going to do all of that. Paolo, the CEO, has been kind of dodging that question. He has not explicitly said it in interviews, and he has been asked about it, but you have seen him floating other options for Tether. So you've seen him most recently in Bloomberg saying, what if we issue a US version of the Tether stablecoin? And you've also seen him just kind of flirting with other business lines for Tether that are not so dependent on the US regulatory regime.
Yeah, definitely something to watch there. Okay, let's shift to the Clarity Act, and we'll wrap this up. But similar to how you brought us up to speed with Genius, can you do the same for Clarity? Where are we with that process?
Yeah, so Clarity is the market structure bill in the House. We saw it basically go through stage one, which is it passed through the two committees which are relevant. That is the House Agriculture Committee and the House Financial Services Committee. The vote was much more bipartisan in the Agriculture Committee than in House Financial Services. It barely seemed to get any Democrats in the House Financial Services Committee. So that all raises the question, what now? There are some slight differences between the Ag Committee's version and the House Financial Services Committee's version that they have to work out. Nobody seems really concerned, though, about whether they will. It's more about when is this going to be ready for a House floor vote. The Clarity Act faces a lot more opposition from Democrats, and the odds of it passing seem a lot less likely than stablecoin legislation. So it's kind of a game now of a lot of behind-the-scenes maneuvering to make sure the votes would be in line before that House floor discussion really starts.
And when you say that it's a little bit more politically complicated. There's more opposition, especially from the Democratic side. Are there specific reasons for that, or is it just that it's so much more of a complicated bill that there's just a lot more surface area to criticize?
There's so many reasons. I could go on and probably write multiple articles about all of the reasons why there's more opposition to the bill. But at a very high level, the Clarity Act is designed to lay out a market structure, right? Like it's a very expansive mandate for this bill. It is laying down what the rules of the road are for all of the intermediaries. It's deciding which tokens are securities and commodities and which regulator is responsible for managing each part of the market. And so there's just a lot more opportunities for people to disagree. There's a lot more like points of failure here. There's also a lot of interesting politics going on here. Right now, you see the Democrats as a party kind of trying to find ways to really oppose the president. They are seeing that as a political win. And so given the president's crypto businesses, you're seeing a lot of opposition to this bill, just like as a way to signal we are anti-Trump from the Democrats. An interesting part of this also is like Maxine Waters who is the ranking member and the senior Democrat on the House Financial Services Committee, is probably not going to run again. She's 86. This is probably her final term. And they changed the rules in the House recently where instead of it being strict seniority of who will take her place, there's actually kind of a little bit of an election behind the scenes. So you see every Democrat on the House Financial Services Committee, especially that thinks they could get Maxine Waters' role as ranking member, trying to really posture on this bill and pretty much anything else that goes through committee. There's some procedural issues that you see even moderate Democrats getting upset about, where apparently the SEC is only providing technical support to the Republicans and not the Democrats on the House Financial Services Committee. This is a very complicated bill. Some Democrats find that to be like the issue to fight over, is that they're just not getting the technical expertise to kind of understand what they are voting on. So I could go on and on, but those are just some of the points.
A lot going on. Very noisy, for sure. Thanks for helping us find a little bit of a signal. Where can people follow you online and, find you online and follow your work?
Yeah, so as you said, I am independent now. That's a new update for me. So I am writing in a lot of different places. I'd say the easiest way to keep up with everything I'm publishing is on Twitter or X. My @ is VRONIRWIN. But I do also have my own newsletter on Substack called Decrypting DC, where I'm publishing scoops and breaking information. I am writing for Project Glitch. And then I also have a weekly column in the Brogan Law newsletter, also on Substack, and that's BROGAN.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Veronica.
Thank you so much.
I think we're going to move to our panel right now. Right, Paul? Okay. So I'm going to invite Peter to the stage, and I'll be moderating, so I'm just going to sit up here. All right. Now, same guy. Now I'm over here. The mic show. Okay. Yeah, we're waiting for Amanda to join us.
Test. Oh, good. It works.
Got any jokes, Peter?
I am a dad now, so I should have some good dad jokes, but it's a lot of pressure, Mike.
Sorry, I did that. It was a little bit of a troll. We can just sit up here silently.
Awkwardly. I need some dad Bitcoin jokes is what I need. Because I'm going to be absolutely insufferable to my kids. They're going to hate cryptocurrency. Like, reverse the age trend. Do you have that problem, Yaya? Yeah, right? They'll be like, Dad, JP Morgan, they know what's going on. Bitcoin, nonsense.
Okay. All right, so Amanda Tuminelli will be joining us on the screen, hopefully, momentarily. There she is. Okay, so back in January, the first PGP of this year, we discussed how, despite the friendlier posture by the new administration toward the crypto industry, there weren't any indications at that point that it intended to change course, at least radically, when it came to the previous administration's prosecution of software developers of crypto privacy tools, specifically the Ethereum-based privacy tool Tornado Cash and the Bitcoin-based privacy tool Samurai Wallet. And now, 5 months into the Trump administration, in many ways, it's still the case that the administration hasn't changed course. But on the other hand, there have been kind of a lot of things that have happened since we last spoke on this topic. So we're privileged to have two of the foremost experts on these subjects join us this morning. On the screen, we have joining us from New York is Amanda Tuminelli, the Executive Director, Chief Legal Officer of the DeFi Education Fund. Joining me on stage is Peter Van Valkenburg, Executive Director at Coin Center. So let's get started. Speaking of Tornado Cash, Amanda and Peter recently published a brief focused on Tornado Cash developer Alexei Pertsev's case in the Netherlands. So let's start there. Amanda, can you please explain what the Pertsev brief is, who it's for, and what the goal is of the brief?
Sure, happy to. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Pertsev in the Netherlands was charged with money laundering and was already convicted at the lower court level of money laundering. And we're now working on his appeal. And what's different in the Netherlands versus in the United States is in the Netherlands, you're actually allowed to relitigate all of the facts on appeal. In the United States, right, you're limited to the record below. You can't add new facts. You can't add new expertise. And so what we decided to do, Coin Center and DEF together, was put in an expert report to provide some additional fact analysis and opinions on how DeFi works, how privacy preserving protocols work, and why simply publishing code is not illegal, and why when third parties use your code for whatever it is they're using it for, you should not be held responsible for that as a software developer. So that's high level what the brief is about, and we're hoping that it will be meaningful to the appellate court in the Netherlands.
And is that specifically aimed at misunderstandings that you guys observed the first time around, or does it just generally seem like the judge didn't understand how the tool worked?
I'm interested to hear what Peter has to say about this too. I think that the court was not as sophisticated on the technology at issue and really didn't understand the nature of immutable smart contract protocols. I think that the court made the assumption, which unfortunately courts here do too as well, which is that like the developer can do something about a third party using their code for bad conduct, when in fact, as we know with the immutable smart contract protocol in Tornado Cash, the developers could not do anything when third parties were using it to launder money. So I think the court made that mistaken assumption and probably made some other bad assumptions when it comes to the tech.
Yeah, I mean, for a little bit of extra context, because it's important, it's actually quite radical what Alexei was charged with in the Netherlands. He was charged with the primary offense of money laundering. So in the US, Storm and Semenov have been charged with conspiracy to launder money, which the government has to prove then that you had an agreement with co-conspirators, known or unknown, to further some criminal act. Now, I think that that's actually a weak case here in the U.S., here in the Southern District of New York, and I think Roman Storm is not guilty of that charge as well. But in the Netherlands, he's not even being charged, Alexei's not even being charged with conspiracy or aiding or abetting. He's being charged with actually laundering money. And that criminal charge carries a maximum 8-year sentence, and the judge gave him 5 years, which is still higher than the mean, and cited the sheer amount of money that Alexei laundered, which is, if you take certain statistics, which are of dubious value, but if you take certain statistics, is in the high millions to billions of dollars range as far as amount of money that went through Tornado Cash. So there's an obvious misunderstanding here, because there's simply no world where Alexei even handled billions of dollars. He built a tool that others used to handle their own money, and collaboratively or individually, all of that amounts to many millions, if not billions of dollars. But Alexei certainly did not handle that money. And so the idea that you'd charge someone actually with money laundering because you created open source software that others use to move billions of dollars, some of them for legitimate purposes, some of them possibly for illegitimate purposes, probably, it's outlandish and extreme. And I think it signals that there was a miscarriage of justice, probably because of a lack of understanding of what Alexei had actually engaged in, the act of publishing software and maintaining a website versus the act of operating a truly trusted and custodial financial institution. If you operate a financial institution, i.e. you hold people's money and you launder billions of dollars for criminals, then that sentencing guideline kind of makes sense. But this is not like that case at all. And the potential legal risk that this creates for anyone else in the world who wants to publish software that could be misused to do bad things is significant. I think the chilling effect, especially in the Netherlands, let alone the EU, let alone globally, is substantial. And so we really want to make sure that at the appellate level, where we're fortunate they can reinvestigate the facts, they get those facts right, and they hopefully rethink that charge.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to introduce another character. I mentioned this at the beginning of this panel, but on the money laundering charge, so Peter mentioned Storm and Semenov. That's a reference to Roman Semenov and Roman Storm. Roman Semenov is not in the U.S. I'm not sure exactly where he is, but Roman Storm is facing trial scheduled for July. Is that correct?
Last I heard, yes.
July. And then there's a Bitcoin project, the Samurai Wallet, and the developers Keon Rodriguez and William Lonergan Hill also face a money laundering charge in the U.S. Samurai Wallet works differently than Tornado Cash, but I was wondering, Peter, if you could explain how even though the underlying technical design is different, the legal arguments are the same or similar as the ones in the Tornado Cash cases, both in the context of the money laundering charge as well as a second charge, which we'll start talking about, which is the unlicensed money transmission charge.
Yeah, so both Storm and Semenov for Tornado Cash are charged with those two charges. They're also charged with the conspiracy to violate sanctions charge, which we'll set aside for the second. And Rodriguez and Hill are charged with money laundering, conspiracy again, and unlicensed money transmission. So, the Tornado Cash tool was a smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain and corresponding website, and that website was a user interface. That website and its user interface were in fact open sourced, so you could even run them locally on your own computer. So a lot of this really does boil down to publishing software and hosting that software on infrastructure that you do control. But what you're hosting is software, not people's money, right? Now, Samurai Wallet was a Bitcoin privacy tool. It was a wallet that you would, have custody over your own funds, and the wallet would help you make CoinJoin transactions. CoinJoin transactions are a way of making a transaction in Bitcoin that makes it more difficult for the public ledger or more difficult for people to look at the public ledger of Bitcoin transactions and see your full transaction history. So it's very similar to this Tornado Cash tool, which use zero-knowledge proofs. CoinJoin transactions use different cryptography and different economic incentives to, however, achieve basically the same result. Now, Hill and Rodriguez developed the Samurai Wallet software. Publishing software for Bitcoin wallets is not a regulated activity. It's not something that you should be charged with unlicensed money transmission for doing. That's FinCEN's 2019 guidance said that very clearly, let alone any plain reading of the relevant regulations and statutes. So the fact that they are being charged is, to me, as outrageous as the fact that Storm and Semenov are being charged. Now, there's an additional wrinkle here that I think trips people up, which is that the Samurai Wallet developers operated something called a coordination server. And a coordination server for CoinJoin transactions is basically like Craigslist. It says, hey, we've got some users over here who are holding their own Bitcoin who want to make a confidential transaction. And there's some users over here who want to make a confidential transaction. If they could find each other, they could make one larger transaction, and they would not be entrusting their money to any third party or to each other in the process, but it would be harder to then disambiguate each individual transaction out of that confidential transaction. And so you're operating a server, a coordination server for creating these confidential transactions amongst multiple potential users. You are not holding people's Bitcoin in the process, and you don't have any control over where they send their money when they make those confidential transactions. All you're doing is basically, as I said, something very Craigslist-like, creating a communications platform by which people who want to protect their privacy together can do so. So hopefully this makes it clear why we take issue with both the Samurai prosecution and the Tornado Cash prosecution. In both cases, you had people primarily engaged in software development, secondarily engaged in hosting that software on websites and doing other communications intermediary-like roles, none of them having specific agreements with any specific users to further any specific criminal acts, and none of them having any actual control over any user funds. So without control over user funds, I would say that the unlicensed money transmission charges are inappropriate. See the FinCEN 2019 guidance and reasonable readings of the regulations and statutes. And without any specific agreements to further specific illicit transactions with any specific users, I don't think the money laundering charges or conspiracy to commit money laundering charges stand either. And I treat these cases as very similar. It's just one is in the Bitcoin world with Bitcoin privacy tech, confidential transactions, and one's in the Ethereum world with zero knowledge proof privacy tech, the smart contracts for Tornado Cash.
Okay, I want to dig into this a little bit more with Amanda and talk about Section 1960 and talk about how there's this, it contradicts what FinCEN said in 2019. So yeah, Amanda and Peter and others in the crypto policy community have pushed back especially hard on this unlicensed money transmitting charge. And Amanda co-authored a paper on it, which we talked about in January. For the folks that aren't familiar, Amanda, can you help us understand what Section 1960 is? I'm sure that you explain this many, many times a day and per week. How the DOJ has been using it and why, in your view, it's the incorrect use of the statute?
Sure, happy to. And it really has become a daily lately. But no, so if you are transferring funds on behalf of customers, you are a money transmitting business. So think Venmo, think PayPal. These are services that exist so that if I want to send money to Peter, I can go to PayPal and they will send my money on my behalf to Peter. They take custody and control over my funds and they send them on their way. Now, Section 1960 makes it a crime if a business like Venmo or PayPal does not get a license to do that. So states issue licenses and the federal government issues licenses for money transmitting businesses. If you don't get one, that is a federal crime under 18 U.S.C. 1960. But what is very clear in the statute itself is that the way that money transmitting businesses are defined is transferring funds. It's literally written in the statute. You have to transfer funds on behalf of the public. Now, I think that's clear. I know Peter thinks that's clear, that transferring funds on behalf of someone means that you have to have their funds in your custody or your possession or your control in order to do that on someone else's behalf. However, the DOJ has recently taken the position in the Tornado Cash case, Samurai Wallet case, and some other cases and some investigations that you do not need to have custody or control over a person's funds in order to transfer them under Section 1960. So I think it's very clear that this is a mistaken interpretation of 1960. If you get into the DOJ's arguments, specifically in the Tornado Cash case and the Storm case, they would have you believe that transferring can be very broad and can be all sorts of activities that you would never think of as transferring funds on behalf of somebody else. And I think for anybody who understands the tech, they understand that a DeFi protocol and a DeFi developer is not a money transmitter or a money transmitting business, and we cannot treat new technologies the way we treat centralized entities that actually are money transmitting businesses. So what we really would love to see is a clearer interpretation by DOJ, and possibly if it takes amending the statute, although I don't think you need to amend the statute to interpret it correctly, it would be great if we could make it even clearer in the criminal code that it should not be interpreted the way that the DOJ has interpreted it.
How does 1960 relate to the Bank Secrecy Act? I get tripped up on this. I think it's confusing if you're not a lawyer. This is also kind of a two-part question, because if you can kind of go from that, segue from that into how the way that the DOJ is using this contradicts what FinCEN said in 2019 and explain that would be super helpful.
Yeah, happy to. And it is complicated. Like you would think that when the term money transmitting business is used in two separate places in the US code, it would just be interpreted exactly the same way and be consistent, because that's probably how it should be done. The DOJ has not taken that position, but the Bank Secrecy Act also regulates money transmitting businesses, defines what they are, and FinCEN has regulations that further interpret the Bank Secrecy Act that give categories of financial institutions that include money transmitting businesses. What's a little bit better in the BSA is that it defines a money transmitting business as one that accepts and transmits funds. So less room for a misinterpretation of how to define a money transmitting business. And then what made it even clearer, and as Peter referred to earlier, in 2019, FinCEN put out guidance that interpreted money transmitting business in the context of wallets, software developers, protocols, and said that if you don't take custody and control over customer funds, if you're simply a developer or software developer of an anonymizing service or anonymizing software and you don't take control, then you are not a money transmitting business. And the industry relied on that guidance in good faith for the past 6 years. The DOJ said in the Storm case that they don't need to listen to the 2019 FinCEN guidance. So they are saying they don't need to listen to the regulator who is in charge of regulating money transmitting businesses because they're going to rely on their interpretation of the statute the way that they've read it. So there is now a big conflict, and you have the Department of Justice telling the public that where there's a conflict in the law, like they're just going to go with their own interpretation and not listen to the primary regulator responsible for this particular conduct.
One more question in this line, and then I'll go back to Peter. But one more from Amanda. In April, President Trump's Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche issued a memo that is related to this topic. At a high level, what was Blanche's message, and specifically, what did it say about 1960? And then I'm going to follow up after you explain it and ask you if it's made any difference or not.
Okay, so the Blanche memo at a very high level was ending regulation by prosecution. So it was a great title, and it was meant to tell the public that they were going to stop. The DOJ was going to stop regulating people by prosecuting them, meaning they're not going to just announce new policy by putting it in a criminal indictment and instead prosecute crimes that were actually related to fraud and harming people, victim-related crimes, as opposed to simple registration violations. So what the memo said about 1960 specifically was that the DOJ was not going to go after registration cases only. So where the only charge at issue was 1960 B1B, which it alleges a violation of the federal registration requirement for money transmitting businesses. Unfortunately, it did not talk about 1960 B1C, which is the provision at issue in the cases that we're talking about here today. And it sort of left open a question as to how the DOJ would treat those cases. Like I said, I think that the memo had a great title. I think the spirit of the memo was a good one. And there were other parts of the memo unrelated to what we're talking about that I think were positive and were net positives for the industry. I just think for this particular issue, it did not solve anything, as evidenced by the fact that the DOJ dismissed just the 1960 B1B object of the conspiracy, so not even a full charge in this Storm case, and let the 1960 B1C part of the conspiracy charge go forward, which is what Storm will be going to trial on in a month.
Right, so this is really in the legal weeds. I'm going to see if Peter can help pull it out of the legal weeds. So there was an aspect of the money laundering charge that the Southern District of New York decided not to pursue.
The unlicensed
unlicensed money transmission charge that the SDNY decided not to pursue. But how can you still be an unlicensed money transmitter if you don't need to license? It seems a little bit backwards, as we've discussed before.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it doesn't make sense. So we learned that the prosecutors in the Southern District of New York were not going to pursue that B1B charge because Jay Clayton, who's incoming to the SDNY and acting, released a letter, a memo saying that they were not going to pursue that charge. But as you said, there were two charges of unlicensed money transmission in that case, B1B and B1C. B1C is knowingly transmitting or transporting criminal funds, but it's still a subcategory of unlicensed money transmission. And so this is all kind of crazy to me, because if you want to charge someone with knowingly facilitating someone's money laundering, then you charge them with conspiracy to launder money, which they have as a separate charge in that case. If you want to charge them with unlicensed money transmission, you have to first prove that they were a money transmitter and they failed to license with someone they were supposed to license with. The B1A part of 18 U.S.C. 1960 says you were supposed to license with a state money transmission regulator, and you didn't. That was never brought. They never brought that charge, maybe because they didn't find, it would be easy to prove that they failed to get a BIT license or failed to get a Wyoming money transmission charter or something like that. The B1B charge is failure to register with FinCEN, the federal money transmission regulator for BSA purposes. And FinCEN says, well, you don't need to register with us. And the Blanche memo that you mentioned said, we're not going to try and change that policy through prosecuting if the regulator had previously said that that's not their policy. The B1C charge says you're still doing unlicensed money transmission and knowingly transmitting criminal funds. But the question is, how are you still unlicensed? They're basically admitting in their refusal to bring those two other charges that they didn't have to register with the states, license with the states. They didn't bring B1A. They're admitting that they didn't have to register with the federal authorities, B1B. So the really difficult question is, if you're going to find them guilty of unlicensed money transmission, but there was no one who was requiring them to license, how insane is that? It's like saying, Mike, You're allowed to drive your scooter, but you have to get licensed. But there's no one in the state of DC that licensed scooter driving, so I'm just going to arrest you for being on your scooter, even though you didn't have to get a license. It doesn't make sense.
Right, and it seems like kind of at a high level, there's this argument going on as to whether or not these things are financial institutions, which has been going on for years.
I don't even think there's an argument. They're just not. The regulator that makes that determination, FinCEN, said in 2019, as clear as can be, that you're not, unless you have total independent control of customer funds. But yes, the DOJ seems to think there's an argument.
There are enough people in the government who believe that they should be regulated like financial institutions. Which,
even if that's true, then you do it prospectively, not retrospectively. You create new laws that regulate them. I would probably be against them, depending on how they were specified. But you don't say, you've always been regulated, haha, surprise, now you're going to jail.
By the way, this highly controversial topic is the core of the discussion that we will be having in October for the DC Privacy Summit, so get your discounted tickets. Okay, let's talk about... If you want to
hear me get more irate, yes.
Let's talk about how some of these things might be fixed. And I'm going to start with Peter, then I'll go to Amanda, and I'm going to have the Bank Secrecy Act be your explanation, your opportunity to explain, and then we'll talk about 1960 with Amanda. So yeah, I guess the question is how can these things get ironed out? How can we get more clarity? Does Congress need to amend the Bank Secrecy Act? And if so, how would it do that and when?
Yeah, so one approach is to look at the Bank Secrecy Act, and I agree with what Amanda said earlier, that actually those definitions in the BSA are not that unclear. They're just being, certain perceived vagueness within them is being exploited by bad faith prosecution. Like, that's what I think is going on in the SDNY. But to address that, we could be doubly clear by amending the Bank Secrecy Act. Now, amending the Bank Secrecy Act is a lift and difficult, and this is sort of a narrow issue. And so actually, I think the best way forward we have, just to give software developers and non-controlling blockchain developers clarity on this issue, is actually a law that's already been introduced. It's been introduced since 2018 in the House, the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act. The Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act defines a category of software developer and infrastructure provider who are non-controlling, means they do not have any unilateral ability to move customer funds or user funds. And they don't have the legal right to those user funds either. So it doesn't cover like a Binance. It doesn't cover a wallet developer who retains 2 out of 3 keys and therefore could actually move customer funds. It only covers people who can't control customer funds and therefore aren't money transmitters. And it says if you fit this definition for non-controlling blockchain developer or service provider, you shall not be found liable for engaging in money transmission. You shall not be treated as a money transmitter or similar designation requiring registration under the Bank Secrecy Act. And there's an original text of that law that was reintroduced this year by Representative Richie Torres and Majority Whip Tom Emmer in the House. It's nonpartisan. It should be non-controversial. It's just about providing clarity to people who are developing good tools. And I'm also very excited to share, which some of you might have seen, we talked a little bit in the last interview with Veronica about the Clarity Act. It has been folded into the Clarity Act as a way of, and I hate the title of the Clarity Act for this reason, providing clarity to non-controlling developers that they will not have money transmission licensing liability if they don't control funds. And that Clarity Act text is subtly adjusted. That we got a lot of feedback. The sponsors of the original bill got a lot of feedback. House Financial Services worked carefully to make sure that we would get everyone comfortable with the language, such that we were sure it was not going to accidentally open up a giant loophole for actually trusted financial institutions to somehow avoid their BSA obligations, and would simply do this narrow and important thing of offering software developers clarity on their legal liabilities. So I think that text in the Clarity Act is excellent. I hope that clarity passes. There's I think other aspects of clarity that are maybe even actually more controversial than this. This one I've heard both from Democrats who are on House Financial Services and Republicans that they're comfortable with this text being in there, and they like the job that it does in offering clarity on money transmission liability.
And Amanda, should Congress do something about the uncertainty around Section 1960? And if so, how and when would you suggest that they do that?
So, as I think Peter and I have both said, I don't think they need to, but I think that they should to close the window for this to ever be misinterpreted again. I think 1960 is clear that it should not apply to non-custodial software developers, but it would be great if it was even clearer, and that the statute itself said that if you do not have custody or control over customer funds, then you are not transmitting funds on behalf of the public. And we will advocate for that as early and as often as it is possible. I don't have a master strategy that I can tell you right now, but the BRCA is obviously a great step in the right direction that we and many others in the industry all came together to support, as Peter said. But that will not be the end. Like, we will keep advocating to amend 1960 to make sure that this can't happen again.
Thank you. Two more questions. One for Peter, one for Amanda. So Rowan Storm is also charged with there's a third charge that he's facing, and this charge doesn't get a lot of airtime, but I know that Peter has thought a lot about it, specifically its First Amendment related implications. So what should we keep in mind about the charge? It's the conspiracy to violate sanctions, right? It's the third charge. That's the one that we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, and that for reasons that escape me that's not a charge that's been brought against the Samurai developers. They just brought that against the Tornado Cash developers, but I'm not sure why they made that prosecution choice, because I think it's a bad charge for either. So the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, is the U.S. Primary sanctions statute, and it says that you're not supposed to make transactions with sanctioned persons, and the president can create a list of sanctioned persons and countries. Like the Iranian National Guard is a sanctioned entity, and Iran in general is sanctioned, the government of Iran and the state of Iran. And so you are not supposed to make transactions with those people as Americans. Now, the Tornado Cash charge is effectively that they conspired to evade sanctions, so that they conspired with others to violate sanctioned laws, which means to help Americans and to themselves transact with a sanctioned entity. In this case, North Korea, probably because of the Lazarus Group's usage of the tool, but actually it's very sort of nebulous and diffuse who exactly they think is the party that they're making a sanctioned transaction with. Because the fact of the matter is, if what you've done is publish software and people use that software to make transactions, you didn't make any transactions with sanctioned persons. And so charging you with conspiracy to make transactions with sanctioned persons is inappropriate. Now, the First Amendment issue here that you flagged, and thank you for that, Mike, is important because IEPA itself, the sanction statute, has a carve-out for certain types of transactions that deal primarily in information. They're called the Berman Amendments to the sanctions laws because they were created by a congressman named Berman. out of fear that people were abusing sanctions laws to stifle First Amendment protected activity, the publication of speech, ideas, technologies even. And, the case law back then was mostly about like Cuban art dealers who were selling paintings in Florida and how they really shouldn't be charged with sanctions evasion because they're selling art. And, this is actually very relevant too. Like our strongest national security play in general in the world is to be the open society, to be the one like, yeah, if the Ayatollah wants to publish a romance novel in the U.S., you can distribute his book. It's probably not going to be good if I mean, maybe it is. I don't know. I don't mean to impugn his writing abilities for other reasons, but like the American way isn't to say we're going to shield Americans from bad ideas abroad and use sanctions laws to do that. It's to say, no, Americans can better decide about the things that they think are right for liberty and freedom and justice and the good life by having those information materials available to them. So we won't misuse sanctions laws to block Americans from accessing those things. Tornado Cash is a perfect example of where the Berman Amendment should step in and stop an abusive sanctions charge. Because to the extent the Romans engaged in any transactions, they paid Amazon to host content on a website, and that content is software. And it's software for doing something radically interesting, like making private electronic cash transactions on the internet. It's not money laundering. It's not I'm paying Iran. It's a transaction to facilitate scientific and technological innovation. And so to the extent they can even point to a potentially sanctioned transaction, and I don't think they can, because Amazon, the person they're paying to host software, is not a sanctioned person. Even if you treated somehow that transaction as a transaction that ultimately involved North Korea because North Korea used the software that was hosted on the Amazon web server, that is not a sanctionable transaction under the Berman Amendment carve-outs because sanctioning that transaction would be manifestly inappropriate under our First Amendment. Americans want and have a right to see and to pay for and to obtain new ideas for human flourishing, and sanctions shouldn't be abused to stop them from using those tools. So this charge, I think, does get a little less attention because of how way off base the other charges are as well, like the unlicensed money transmission charge, which we spend a lot of time on. But it's equally as dangerous to the free exchange of ideas and encouraging, innovation and protecting our First Amendment rights.
Okay, one last question on the sanctions, and this is separate from the developer prosecutions. Some of you may remember that the Department of Treasury imposed sanctions on the Tornado Cash software in 2022. A federal appeals court ruled late last year that the Treasury had overstepped its authority in doing that. And then in March, the Treasury delisted the software, but there was some nuance there in the way it acted. And it also did not remove sanctions from Tornado Cash developer Roman Semenov. So this last question is for Amanda. Can you explain first the nuances in the way that the Treasury delisted the software and why that matters? And then secondly, the significance of the actions that the department has taken towards Roman Semenov.
Yeah, absolutely. So when OFAC originally listed sanctions related to Tornado Cash, they listed the website, like the Tornado Cash front end, smart contracts related to the protocol, and Roman Semenov, one of the developers. Coin Center, along with others, challenged those sanctions in federal court, and one of those cases got all the way up to the appellate level. It's the Van Loon case. And in that case, the Fifth Circuit said that OFAC's original listing of sanctions on smart contracts were invalid, that they could not actually sanction smart contracts the way that they did that. They're not property. They're not capable of being owned when they're immutable. So that was a win for sure. What you would think would happen was OFAC would say, hey, in accordance with this Fifth Circuit ruling, we're going to delist the sanctions that were ill-conceived of to begin with. Instead, OFAC did a press release that said, in our discretion, we are going to delist the sanctions that we originally put on the Tornado Cash website and the smart contracts. And they didn't say this, but what I think is like the quiet part is they are preserving their ability to relist at some point, but that's like not a problem for today. I just think that there was a word choice there that they
crafted. But what they did not do is delist the sanctions on Roman Semenov, the actual developer who was related to the smart contracts. And I think it would have been consistent and made a lot of sense to delist Roman Semenov at the same time that they delisted the smart contracts. Because what I think the message is there is, okay, so now people can use this protocol and use these smart contracts, but people can't build them. And I think that keeps us in the same place we were in before, which is chilling innovation, chilling development, and uncertainty as to what conduct actually gets you a sanctions listing.
The one thing I'd add to that, you might be wondering, okay, why didn't they sanction Roman Storm? Because we're talking about Semenov, not Storm. Well, it's because he's an American. He's a U.S. person. And so this actually really highlights something that's very dangerous about our sanctions policy. So I agree with Amanda 100% that the rational thing for OFAC to do after the Fifth Circuit opinion was to just drop all the sanctions. And they almost did that. But the Fifth Circuit technically said they just can't sanction the immutable smart contracts. The Fifth Circuit didn't say you can't sanction anyone having anything to do with Tornado Cash. And so, you know, they weren't under an obligation to not sanction Roman Semenov, but there's something pernicious here in that should we be using OFAC and the sanctions power, which is probably the most powerful geopolitical force we have short of going to war with a country, to figure out who should be and shouldn't be writing software globally? And we know we can't do that to an American. That's why they didn't even try with Roman Storm, because he's got constitutional rights. You can't sanction Brian Armstrong. You can't sanction Satoshi, assuming Satoshi was an American. I don't know if he was or not, actually. So maybe you could sanction Satoshi. And that's also an abuse of the sanctions tools. We're not going to say, oh, that software in the world causes us some problems with our traditional strategies for stopping money laundering, and so we're going to actually, ban Americans from transacting with the person who authored that software, which is what it means to be sanctioned, right? And there's no due process when you sanction someone. You can't say, I shouldn't be sanctioned for this. I want to challenge it in court. Or actually, before you even sanction me, you have to charge me with something, and then you have to prove that I'm guilty before I get. No, you just immediately end up on a list, and now Americans are banned from transacting with you. You can't get banking relationships. You can't do anything like this. So the fact that the one sanction remains is a foreign developer, not a U.S. person, is kind of ugly. It might be legally kosher in the sense that, yes, without due process, we can sanction foreign persons effectively for almost any reason. But there's a lot of talk right now of global hegemony and U.S. exerting power overseas and all kinds of controversial things. This one, I think, is hyper-controversial. Just because someone writes a book that the American administration doesn't like doesn't mean we should tell Americans they can no longer economically interact with that person. And that's effectively what's going on in the Semenov example.
Yeah, thank you. Amanda, is there anything else that you would add before we let you go, get back to your work?
I would just echo, please support the BRCA staying in clarity as it keeps moving through Congress. Whatever other issues may or may not exist in clarity, that is the most important thing for software developers, in my opinion. And when we do actually come up with a strategy for amending 1960, I hope everybody will support that as well.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I know you have a hard stop at 11:30, so we'll let you go.
Thanks so much.
Paul, do we have more announcements? Okay. Is there anything else you want to add, Peter?
No, this is great. I hope this was helpful and engaging. I know we got into a lot of really weedsy legal issues, and that's just the nature of these prosecutions, is they brought to bear 3 very, very broad and potentially abusable criminal charges: sanctions evasion, money laundering, and unlicensed money transmission, and interpreted them in ways that are just very against the rights of the defendants, which is in itself incorrect. We're supposed to interpret ambiguous statutes in favor of criminal defendants because we want people to only be held guilty for conduct that they knew was against the law, not that they should have known that somebody in a crazy way thought might be against the law. And so I appreciate you all listening to us go into depth on all of these different parts of the U.S. criminal code, because I think it really does matter if people are going to build these good tools in the US, they're going to need to know that they're not going to accidentally, through no fault of their own, end up arrested in the middle of the night.
Thank you so much, Peter. I appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thanks, Mike.
Take care, everybody. See you next time.